What's good, everybody, and welcome to another episode of ZAGSPOD. I'm Sam Lance, and I'm joined by the founder of ZagsBlog.com, Adam Zagoria, and we are here to chat about some college hoops, as well as a little bit of recruiting today. Adam, I believe you're joining me from St. Martin. I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty jealous of you. It's snowy here in Lawrence, and it just snowed a little bit last night as well. I don't think we've hit over 30 degrees in a while, and I don't have any boots, so every time I step outside, my feet get wet.
Yes, I did sneak away for a few days, and I know it's pretty cold there. Hope you warm up soon. And look, before we start talking about hoops, Sam, I think we should just extend our thoughts and say that our hearts are with all the people in California and the Los Angeles area, dealing with the wildfires. It just looks beyond tragic, and hopefully you know the people who lost their homes and their belongings can rebuild going forward.
Yeah, hearts out to everybody that has been affected there. Uh, Before we kind of get into it with the conferences, we're going to discuss kind of our conference championship picks, everything like that. Looking at the bracketology right now, Joe Lunardi, he currently has 13 teams in from the SEC and 11 teams in from the Big Ten. That's 24 total bids. So we kind of wanted to debate, will it be a failure for the SEC, the Big Ten, if they don't get a national champion this season? And I'll kick it to you for that one, Adam.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say yes on that, Sam. I mean, I was just tweeting about this and doing a little math. I mean, that's 24 bids, give or take one or two, from two leagues, the two super conferences that have 16 or 18 teams. That would be more than a third of the field of 68. Assuming, each somebody from the SEC and the Big Ten wins the tournament title, you're talking about 22 of the 36 at-large bids going to those two leagues. Um, so, the question is, okay, these are great leagues. Everyone understands how great the SEC is this year, in the Big Ten, but does it really come down to who cuts down the nets in April? I actually asked Dan Hurley that on a Zoom call this week, the UConn head coach, and because he's sort of, he had some thoughts about the Big Ten before the season started. He didn't call them out by name, but he said, look, unless you're winning championships and taking home hardware, you don't deserve to be called the best league in the country. And obviously, the Big East with UConn has won the last two and four of the last eight. So, there's no doubt the SEC is having an incredible year. 13 teams in, all these teams at the top of Ken Palm and the top of the polls. But at the end of the day, don't you think it's, if one of these teams doesn't win it all, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I would say for the Big Ten, I don't think it would necessarily be a failure. I mean, I have not been alive to see a Big Ten team win a national title. I mean, that is pretty insane to wrap my head around. The SEC, though, I do think it'll be a bit of a failure. I mean, they have, at least in my eyes, probably 4 to 5 teams that I think right now could make the Final Four. There's a realistic possibility there's an all SEC Final Four this season. That is a realistic possibility. So I do think with that league, they got to get it done this year. There's got to be an SEC team that finishes at the top of college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, look, Sam, the last SEC team to win was Kentucky in 2012. That's going on 13 years, that'll be 13 years. Last Big Ten team, as you referenced, was Michigan State in 2000, which I can't believe is before you were born. I was 32 then, but that's another story. How old was I in 2020? 32, yeah. And Bill Clinton was president then. That's a while ago. So we can talk all season about how great these leagues are and everything. And in the end, look, 67 of the 68 teams in the field are going to lose their last game. Only one team is going to win. And you're right. SEC could close out the Final Four, but I think unless they do that and come home with a championship, it's going to be considered a failure.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Let's kind of get into these conferences now. We're going to pick our winners for each of these conferences, and let's start with probably the easiest one to pick. That is the ACC. The ACC right now only projected five bids from Joe Lunardi. That would be Duke, North Carolina, Clemson, Louisville, and Pitt. And if you're not picking Duke to win this league, I think you're wrong because Duke looks right now on a whole nother level than any of these other teams. Of course, spearheaded by Cooper Flagg, and Cooper Flagg had that nasty dunk the other night. I thought that was absolutely insane.
Yeah, I mean, I saw them, early in the season, the preseason live. I think they're coming back up here to New York in February, I want to say, to play a game at the Garden. Um, but yeah, you have to give props to Cooper Flagg. He has exceeded expectations, right? This guy came in with all kinds of hype. He and probably Janai Broom from Auburn, two favorites for all the National Player of the Year awards. You want to throw in a couple other guys there, maybe Eric Dixon, Villanova, Cam Jones from Marquette, a couple of guys playing really well. But Cooper Flagg has exceeded expectations. He's making his teammates better. That team is clearly the best team in the ACC. And just getting back to what we were talking about a moment ago, Sam, with the bids, right now it looks like the ACC's only going to get, maybe 5 out of 18 teams in. Um, so, I'd say that league as a whole is, it's a little disappointing. I mean, you got Clemson, Louisville, Pitt, Carolina's been, pretty disappointing. I will say one of the best things I saw was a mock bracket this week that had Louisville playing St. John's in the first round of the tournament at Rupp Arena, which of course is where Pitino coached at Kentucky. So, stuff like that just makes me smile, and who wouldn't want to see that?
Yeah, I wanted to shout out Louisville actually really quick because what a job Pat Kelsey has done. They've had a couple of guys go down and they just keep on winning games here. So shout out to Louisville. North Carolina also kind of starting to get rolling here a little bit with the emergence of Ian Jackson. If you think about it, North Carolina hasn't really had a bad loss so far this season, and they're going to be able to stack up some wins hopefully here in the ACC. It is weird, thinking about a five bid ACC because growing up as a college basketball fan, the ACC was the basketball I was watching growing up. I mean, there are so many great teams in the league. It is a little odd to see this happen kind of to the ACC. What are your just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean it's a real top heavy league. It's been that way for the past few years. I mean, obviously it was a couple of years ago, right? They had Duke and Carolina both in the Final Four. Those are obviously the two blue bloods in the league. It is great what Pat Kelsey has done at Louisville. I mean, they were they were irrelevant. They were beyond irrelevant under Kenny Payne. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
And Pat Kelsey's a guy who goes in there with a lot of energy, a lot of passion, brings in some transfers, coaches the guys up. And look, there's certain programs in college basketball. It's good for the sport, Sam. I think it's good for college basketball when teams like when Louisville's good up here, when St. John's and Georgetown are good. It's good for college basketball. And I'd say, look, there's however number you want to call it, 10, 12 teams maybe that could win the whole thing. It's still wide open. And Duke is certainly one of those teams. I mean, depending on the draw, they're going to play their first couple games in Raleigh, North Carolina. They're not going to have to leave the state. Duke is, in a way flying under the radar, I think this year, despite all the hype on Cooper and everything,
Because the
because,
ACC.
because everyone's talking about the SEC and to a lesser extent, the Big Ten.
Yeah. I think Duke is going to be on path for number one seed here with that ACC schedule. Let's move on to the Big East. Obviously, a big game this past week. Villanova taking down UConn. Alex Caravan missing two free throws there at the end with a chance to take the lead. And I heard Rob Doster say that it was actually the first time Caravan has gone 0 for 2 in his entire UConn career, and it comes in this game. What do you think about that game? And then go ahead and give us your conference champion pick for the Big East.
Yeah, well, big picture, let's keep in mind that UConn is playing without Liam McNeely, Sam, right? He's out with a high ankle sprain. He's, expected to come back later in January. So they weren't at their full complement against Villanova. One side note there is I think that Liam McNeely's absence opens the door, excuse me, for this guy, Thomas Sorber, Georgetown freshman. He's a Trenton, New Jersey native to win Big East Freshman of the Year honors. It was going to be a battle between McNeely and Sorber. McNeely's out, so I think Sorber, who's getting some NBA interest, probably wins that award. I don't think UConn without McNeely is not a fully complete. I think Marquette. I'm going to pick them to win the league just because they're undefeated in the league right now and in first place. Um, you know, Assuming UConn has everyone back for the Big East tournament, that's another story. Certainly I think UConn or Marquette is the favorite to win the Big East tournament. And then you've got other teams, a couple other teams. St. John's is in the field, excuse me, right now under Rick Pitino. They're having trouble shooting the ball a little bit, but they're playing great defense. They rebound really well. They've got a star big man in Zuby Ejiofor, Kansas transfer, who's probably the most improved player of the year in the Big East. Davon Smith, Kadari Richmond, they've got some really good guards. And they still have some, the knock on them, I guess, at this point is, excuse me, they haven't really beaten anyone. They obviously lost that brutal game to Baylor in the Bahamas. They still have a couple games with UConn, a couple games with Marquette. Those should be interesting. And then teams like Villanova and Georgetown are, knocking on the door of the NCAA tournament. Villanova's on the bubble now. Excuse me. And just earlier this year, Kyle Neptune, the Villanova coach, people were saying he was going to be out of there after this year, was fighting for his job. So again, it's good for the Big East. It's good for college basketball when Villanova is good. I still don't think they're that deep. They only play, 6, 7 guys. But Eric Dixon is as strong an offensive force as there is in college basketball. He's a handful. And, Georgetown, it's, again, good for the Big East and good for college hoops when they're good. They have two huge games this weekend up here in the, Eastern Corridor with Villanova visiting St. John's at the Garden Saturday night and UConn visiting Georgetown in DC. Both games expected to have, more than about 15,000 fans.
Yeah, both of those are going to be some huge games this weekend. My pick for the Big East champion, I'm actually going to go with UConn. I think if they kind of
Safe
withstand,
pick. That's a safe pick.
yeah, right. I think if they kind of withstand the stretch here, they got Georgetown and then Creighton. If they can get Liam McNeely back before the Marquette game, I think that'll be huge because after Georgetown Creighton, you find a way to win those two games. You got Butler, Xavier, DePaul before Marquette. So I think UConn has a chance here to go on a little bit of a run, and then hopefully you get McNeely back for the stretch of games. I think this conference might come down to March 5th. It's a Wednesday when Marquette rolls into town to play UConn. I think that game might be the deciding game for this conference there because I think Marquette and UConn are going to be pretty close. And then, kind of like you said, I think St. John's is in that next tier, kind of on their own. And then from there, I'd kind of group in tier three, Villanova, Georgetown, and Creighton also kind of on the bubble there. But shout out to Kyle Neptune. Shout out to Villanova for a big win. We tabbed it as, the biggest win in the Kyle Neptune era. And you're right. Whenever Villanova's good, whenever Georgetown's good, whenever the Big East is good, I think it's just great for college hoops.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Creighton there. You're right there. They're kind of on the bubble now too. I think, if you're doing power rankings in the league, I'd, probably put Creighton, maybe fourth now behind Marquette, UConn, and St. John's. But they're a team that was expected to be in the tournament. And again, when it comes to number of bids, I think the folks at the Big East are a little disappointed. They want to get 5, 6 teams in every year. Right now, they really only have 3. If they could get a Creighton and a Villanova in, or at least one of them in, then obviously you have more teams with a chance to go further.
Yeah, right now Joe Lenardi with 3, Big East teams in the field. I think the Big East ends up getting 5 or 6 this year because I don't think Dan Hurley would let the committee hear the end of it if that happens again this next season.
Yeah, six might be a little ambitious. Four, I think, is realistic. Five, we'll have to see.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the Big Ten. Really interesting league this year because you think about it, there's not really a dominant team in the Big Ten this season. There's not really a top dog in the Big Ten. My pick right now would be Illinois to win the Big Ten. I just like some of their young pieces, like Will Riley. The obviously the point guard that they have there. I really like Illinois, so that's going to be my pick. Right now, Illinois is 4-1 in conference. They're up there with Indiana and Purdue, also 4-1, and then you got the Michigan schools, Michigan State and Michigan are both 4-0. Played one less game. So, what are just your thoughts on the Big Ten this year?
Well, I'll tell you who's not going to win the Big Ten, Sam. I'm going to go off the board, and that is Rutgers. It is just kind of unbelievable what's happening there. I feel bad for Steve Peichel. He's a good man. He's a good coach. He used to call me when he was at Stony Brook and, tell me about players he had there. And I think everybody likes and respects Steve Peichel, but it is pretty historic what's going on. They've got two of the top three projected draft picks in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. They got hammered again by Purdue last night. And, at this point, they're not going to make the NCAA tournament. And, Sam, they might not even make the Big Ten tournament, which is because, 15 teams make that, I believe. So it's really kind of unbelievable. The fact is the rest of the teams surrounding those two guys are more, A10 level players. Dylan and Ace still going to go in the top couple picks in the draft. I wrote about that this week, talked to some NBA scouts. But coming into this season, excuse me, Rutgers fans, they were talking Final Four. They're thinking, they could contend for a national championship. And it's just been a massive disappointment there.
Yeah, I think it kind of shows in this era. You need to be old to be able to win. I know Duke. You could point at Duke and say, well, look at them. They have a lot of pieces like Malik Brown, who are veteran guys who are kind of, supplementing those younger pieces. Rutgers just doesn't have that. Let's be honest. Rutgers does not have that, and there's a lot of weight on the shoulders of Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper this season. So. Yeah, like you said, it's looking really bleak there at Rutgers this season. And to have two guys going in the top five and not even make the Big Ten tournament would be quite the disappointment. It does make me think, man, if Cliff Amore would have just stayed,
Yeah.
how different could this have been for Rutgers?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I think they went after a couple guys in the portal where it didn't work out. And you're right. In this era of college basketball, the old adage, you want to get old and stay old. That is, harder and harder to do. But, you cannot rely on freshmen. The only teams, as we've talked about a million times, to win an NCAA tournament in the one and done era, while relying primarily on freshmen, was the Kentucky team in 2012 with Anthony Davis and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and the 2015 Duke team with Jahlil Okafor and Tyus Jones and Justice Winslow. There have been a few other one and dones here and there, but not on teams that won and not teams that relied on them. As far as your Big Ten question, yeah, I think Illinois or Michigan State are your safer bets, but both Michigan teams are good. And again, they'll have a bunch of teams in the tournament, chance to go deep, but do they have that one team that can really win it all? I mean, they remember last year, Illinois got throttled by Connecticut. I was at that game, whatever it was, 20, 25 points. And then Purdue looked great, got to the championship game, lost by 15 to Connecticut. Now, Connecticut is not the team it was last year. They're not as dominant, but some of these ACC teams, could be that dominant. And it's unclear, again, whether the Big Ten will be able to hang with these teams in the tournament.
Yeah, I think Michigan is maybe the best bet to go deep in the NCAA tournament just because of the matchup problems they pose. You got two 7-footers and you got Danny Wolf running pick and roll action. So that's pretty hard to guard for some teams. So I would say
Former Yale Bulldog, right?
yes, indeed. I would say Michigan to go farthest in the NCAA tournament, but I think Illinois ends up winning the regular season. And I really think kind of Illinois, Michigan, Michigan State are all in the tier of their own at the top. And I think Indiana, Purdue are kind of that next tier. And then Oregon is probably there as well, but they're already 2-2 in conference. And I believe Oregon had just lost to Illinois and somebody else here recently.
They
So
did. They did beat Ohio State the other night, right?
I, I,
Oregon.
Ohio State actually ended up coming back and beating Oregon.
My mistake.
That was the game that I was thinking of from last night. So yeah,
It's still weird. I mean, doesn't it strike you as weird when you look at the standings and you see like it still doesn't compute that, USC and UCLA are in the Big Ten and Arizona State are in the Big 12. It's still kind of weird.
it's weird. And that was actually my mistake. Oregon did get the win against
Yeah,
Ohio State. It was
that's what I
seventy-three
thought.
71.
Yeah.
Oregon ended up getting that win. All right, let's move on to the Big 12. Right now, the Big 12 to me is really good, but it's not as good as I think people thought coming into the season. They're looking at 8 bids right now. That's what Joe Lunardi has. My pick, I think the safest pick to win the conference would be Iowa State. They're just so complete as a team. We know Iowa State's going to guard. We know that, but this year, their offense has been great. Keyshawn Gilbert has really taken a step up. Then you got Milan Momcilovic, who can just drain 8 threes on you in a hurry. And then you also have the Jefferson, the St. Mary's transfer, who has come in and really done well there. And then they have the six-man Curtis Jones, who comes off the bench and has scored 5 20+ point games this season. Probably the best six-man in college basketball. So I'm going to go with Iowa State, with, of course, Houston and Kansas in the hunt there, I think, for the title. And then probably Arizona, Baylor in the next tier. And then from there, honestly, who kind of knows? It's kind of a bunch of teams bunched up there.
Yeah, I think the smart pick there, like you said, Sam, is Iowa State. I mean, they've got some impressive wins, right? They hammered Baylor by 19. They beat Marquette, the Big East's top team, by 11. I mean, you see a lot of the Big 12 because you're at the Kansas games. What do you make of Kansas's chance to win another Big 12 title?
Yeah, I was actually looking at the schedule the other day, and if Kansas gets this win over Cincinnati and finds a way to win in Ames, then I think the Big 12 regular season is kind of in the picture there. The remaining road games I think that are really tough would be Baylor and then Houston, and then they get Arizona at home the last day of the regular season. Uh, Honestly, a lot has changed for Kansas just within the past week. Shaquille Moore wasn't playing early in the season due to an injury. He's come on, started the last 2 games, and Kansas has absolutely dominated UCF. And then Arizona State looked kind of shaky in the first half, and then Kansas allowed just 13 points to Arizona State in the second half. Bill Self got his first win over Bobby Hurley, who's previously 0-2. So I think Kansas is going to be right there. And then Houston is Houston. But again, I mean, Iowa State, I think right now is still on a whole nother level, and they know what they are at this moment. I still think Kansas is kind of finding who they are a little bit here.
Yeah, a couple big, huge dates on the calendar there, Sam. Wednesday, you've got Kansas at Iowa State, right? And
Yep.
then Iowa State comes to Kansas February 3rd, 2 huge games. And then, some fun matchups like Iowa State at Arizona, January 27th. Then and then I guess they host Arizona in March. So it's some big name brands there between Kansas, Arizona, and now Iowa State. It's a lot of, every night there's some huge games in that league.
Yeah. Yep. I think also just couple few other teams to touch on. West Virginia obviously beating Kansas. They lost their last game here, and I think West Virginia is kind of due for a little bit of a fall off. And then Cincinnati is in danger. They were a top 20 team, 10-1
Yeah, yeah.
before the holiday break, and now they're 0-3, and they got to play Kansas. Kansas coming into town on Saturday, so. A big game for Cincinnati to maybe get back on track here because they have struggled as of late. All right, let's move on to the SEC. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the best conference in college basketball this season. Uh, I'm going to go with Auburn for my pick to win the SEC. Auburn is going to be the number one team in the AP poll come Monday. If they beat South Carolina, and South Carolina is probably the bottom team in the SEC this year, so I would assume that Auburn will get it done against South Carolina. But I just love Auburn. Watching them, I think they're the most fun team to watch in college basketball. Joey Broom's one of the best players in college basketball. So I'm going to go with Auburn. But hey, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida, there's not much of a drop off there at all.
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking at the standings this morning. I mean, this league is so loaded that the top five teams are all on winning streaks of at least two games, and the top four, Auburn, Mississippi State, Alabama, Texas A&M, have won at least seven straight games. I mean, that is pretty freaking, remarkable. Those streaks, they won't keep up. You wouldn't think now that we're into league play and they have to play each other so much. But, even like the bottom teams in that league, South Carolina are not bad and are potential NCAA tournament teams. I mean, you're talking about getting 13 teams in. Um, and obviously the old record was the Big East in 2011 with 11 teams. It sure seems like the SEC is gonna break that. Yeah, Auburn, that again, that's a safe, smart pick. They've got the best player in the country in Janai Broom, an excellent coach in Bruce Pearl. I always like what Nate Oates does at Alabama. I like to watch them play. They're high scoring. They get up and down the court. They've got great players in Mark Sears and Grant Nelson. LeBaron Philon's played well. It is a little, Cliff Amory's been, I guess, a little bit of a disappointment there and probably would have helped Rutgers out. But I think Alabama, like last year, is a team that could get to a Final Four and go deep. And then, right, you look at Kentucky, what they're doing under Mark Pope in his first year with an entirely new roster, and what's going on in Florida. I mean, they just hammered Tennessee the other night by what, 30 points, Sam?
Yep, 30 points. I think it was the second biggest loss by an AP number one in the history of college basketball for Tennessee there.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because you go back to the beginning of the year and you know, Todd Golden was making headlines for the wrong things. And that story seems to have, you know, disappeared or subsided from the headlines for now. And he's able to sort of survive that storm. And you know, they're a Final Four type team. They got former Iona guard Walter Clayton playing great for them. And just very impressive what they've accomplished.
Yeah, I think the top five in this league, Auburn, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida. If you told me right now that, either of those teams will win the national championship, I would see that. So this league is just absolutely ridiculous. And then you got Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, who are really good. Georgia, they got a big win this past week. I believe that was against I forget who. Oh yeah, Kentucky. Georgia just beat Kentucky there to get a big win. So this league is deep. You're looking at the standings, and you got Arkansas down there at 0-2, and Arkansas was ranked this week. They probably will fall out of the rankings, but then you also have Oklahoma, the number 17 in the country. They're 0-2 in this league, and their first two losses of the season have come in SEC play. So This league is insane. It's just
Yeah,
insane.
Georgia won that game at Rupp too. So
That
it just
that was at Georgia. It was at Georgia.
was it.
Yeah. Kentucky's having a little bit of troubles on the road. All the games that Kentucky has lost has come away from Rupp. So I think it'll be key to kind of see. I think they go to Mississippi State this weekend. It'll be interesting to see if they can kind of get over some of those road woes.
Yeah, but you're right. It's incredibly deep league. But like we talked about, the tournament will be full of SEC teams. They'll end up playing each other in, Sweet 16 and Elite Eight probably. And then it'll come down to who is the one team that can, one or a couple teams that can separate themselves.
All right, really quick before we get into some brief recruiting updates, I want to get into a couple of these games this weekend. UConn Georgetown, I think, is probably the biggest game of the weekend. Of course, the SEC is loaded. There's Alabama, Texas A&M, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Florida, Arkansas this weekend. And the Big 12, Kansas, Cincinnati is the headliner there. And then Mountain West. Boise State travels to Utah State. Utah State's 15-1 right now, so that's a big game. But I want to ask you about UConn Georgetown. What are you just thinking with that game? Pretty big game for Georgetown and Ed Cooley.
Yeah, I was told. I mean, both John Fanta and I, talked to people who said they're expecting more than 15,000 fans there. Now, of course, a lot of them will be UConn fans, Connecticut fans in the DC area or people who travel down there. It's just, again, like we said before, it's great for college basketball in the Big East to have Georgetown be relevant again. Ed Cooley left Providence. He's rebuilding that program. I know the fans are hoping Thomas Sorber doesn't leave after the NBA for the NBA this year. I think he's gonna, you have to test the waters, and then probably unless he's a lottery pick, he'll stay. Um, and then they got, Malik Mack, the transfer, playing well there for them. So, UConn's gonna, they'll have their fans there supporting them. Malik Mack and Jaden Epps both averaging about 14, 15 points, plus Sorber leading Georgetown at 15 and the Big East in rebounds at 8. So it should be an entertaining game. It's an afternoon game. Again, UConn doesn't have Liam McNeely. They're coming off a loss at Villanova. If somehow Georgetown wins that game, it'll obviously be the biggest win, for Ed Cooley at Georgetown and the biggest win for the Hoyas program in a long time. And it would be the second straight loss for UConn. I know some people, I saw Zach Braziller from the Post is picking Georgetown to win that game. I'm not sure I see that. I still think the Huskies have a little bit too much experience, but it's a huge opportunity for Georgetown.
Honestly, the UConn would be giving the Big East a big favor losing those two games if you think about it. I mean, giving Villanova and Georgetown both resume wins come Selection Sunday could be big for the Big East as a whole. Let's get into some recruiting now, Zags. I don't want to butcher the name. Is it Haran? Is that what it is?
I
Heron Zerno?
I believe it's Haroon,
Haroon.
but I'm be lying if I said it was 100% certain on that. But I did speak to him a little bit. He visited Indiana, said he had an outstanding visit. I mean, it's pretty interesting because he's from Bosnia. He flew to the US for a series of visits. He had never been to the United States before. He told me he just measured in at 6'7", 205. Said he had an outstanding visit at Indiana, met with the coaches, met with Mike Woodson, and then he's going to go see Creighton, Wisconsin, and Virginia, and then go back home and huddle with his family and make a decision. But
Cool.
it's you know, deep shooter, 3-point shooter. Told me he can score in a variety of ways, can set up his teammates, wants to win. So it's obviously kind of an exciting mid-season, recruitment everyone's keeping their eye on. What else do you see going on out there
Yeah,
recruiting?
we got a few of the top prospects still on the board. There's not many players left. But Nate Ament, Koa Pete, Caleb Wilson, and Braden Burris, those are all five-star players that are still on the board. And then there's a couple other top guys who are going to be committing here this next week. Nate Ament, this is a guy whose recruitment it's not going to end probably until March or April. He wants to see kind of these teams play, see how these seasons shake up. He's visited Texas in September. He took Louisville, Tennessee, Notre Dame in October. He also took Duke for Countdown to Craziness, and then he has a visit set with Kansas State for February 11th. So again, recruitment is a long way from over, but I consider probably Duke and Tennessee as the favorites right now, with Notre Dame also being kind of one of the sneaky teams in the picture. Obviously, Notre Dame has a really good class right now, headlined by Jalen Harrelson, a five-star. So Nate Ament, uh, will be a while until we get a decision there, but that's kind of what's going on with him. Moving on to
Caleb Wilson, right? He's coming up soon.
yep,
I've been texting with his dad. He told me they don't have a date yet, but they're going to settle on one. Sounds like in the next couple weeks. Seems like a Kentucky North Carolina battle.
yep.
I don't think either school has been given an indication yet on where he's going.
Yeah, it's going to be Kentucky or UNC there. I'm still leaning Kentucky just because of his relationship with the Caden Lewis. And if you remember kind of that social media spree they had back and forth, kind of hinting that they might be joining forces at Big Blue Nation. Uh, yeah, honestly, the North Carolina stuff, it's been a lot of smoke recently. And we've kind of seen whenever decisions are nearing, like it happened with Darren Peterson. Ohio State, was kind of getting a lot of late smoke. With AJ Dybanta, there's a lot of people saying Alabama was picking up some late momentum, and then of course AJ was already signed in November. So
Right, right.
I don't know if I'm necessarily buying some of this late North Carolina smoke. I think Kentucky winds up getting this done.
I mean, look, if NIL is a factor, then Kentucky's going to be in there. That's one thing that you have to remember in all of these transfer and recruiting situations is it's all comes down to NIL, right, Sam?
Yep. All right, two more guys I wanted to go over real quick from the five-star ranks. Koa Pete, it's looking like it's going to come down to Arizona or Arizona State there. Obviously, he's from out there in Arizona and he plays for his hometown high school still. So it's looking like it's going to be those two schools that it comes down to. Still no word on an exact decision timeline there from Koa. And then Braden Burries, he added an official visit to Tennessee. This past week, he's going to have that on January 21st for the Mississippi State game. It's worth noting that Burry's mom played softball at Tennessee, so he's got a connection there. And he's also taken visits to Alabama, Oregon, Arizona, and SMU, and then USC and UCLA both had him for officials. I think this one's going to come down to the SEC schools, Alabama, Tennessee. I think Burries has said previously that he wants to play in that conference, and why wouldn't you? Looking at them this season with how good the SEC is, so I think Alabama, Tennessee kind of have the upper hand there with Braden Burries.
Yeah, it's always fun to keep track of these high profile recruitments here. It's a little slow right now, right? Where most of the top 20, 25 guys are off the board. We're starting to turn our attention to more some of the 2026 guys, like up here in New York and New Jersey, you got Duran Rippey from Blair Academies
So
blowing
good.
up. And I got Jaden Hodge from St. Rose. Both of these guys getting a lot of offers. Um, AJ DeBonce, it'll be interesting to see. This is a little tangential, but I talked to some NBA scouts about the Rutgers guys and not making the tournament. And they said, hey, the same thing could happen next year to BYU. Now, our friend Seth Davis has chimed in on Twitter with me and Mike DeCourcy saying BYU's got huge NIL money and they'll be able to buy whatever they want out of the portal to
Yeah.
put around AJ. Presumably BYU with their money has more NIL money than Rutgers had. So you have to keep in mind these sort of moving pieces of when you get a great freshman, get a great recruit, in addition to giving them NIL money, you got to have enough left over in your budget to put the older pieces from the portal around them.
Yeah, I like that BYU also has another highly touted freshman. The center Xavier Staten will also be a freshman there next year, and he actually just transferred to Utah Prep, so
Right.
he'll be playing with AJ for the rest of the season, kind of build that chemistry before they head off to BYU. Two more people. You got Mo Silla announcing on January 13th. That one will come down to Arkansas, Oregon, and Georgia Tech. Not exactly sure, where he's leaning right now, but we'll try to find out for you guys and have something up on zagsblog.com for that decision. And then Eufosa Oliogu. This is a kid that I actually, whenever I first joined, Adam, I covered at the UAA finals in 2022. And this is whenever he was, I believe he was 2 years younger, playing up with the 17 U's back then for Canada Elite. So this is a player that I've seen in person. He's really just kind of a versatile wing, can do a lot of different things for you, can shoot, can dribble, but he's mostly kind of known for his defensive prowess. It's going to come down to Butler and Maryland here. I say Butler probably has the upper hand to land Ufosa Oliogu.
All right, great job, Sam. You're always killing it on the recruiting trail. Um, Looking forward to the games this weekend. And what do you got? What's the next game you're covering?
I am going to cover the Kansas Cincinnati game at home. Won't be able to make the trip up to Cincinnati, but I'll be going to Ames. I got my
Nice.
other podcast host. He coaches a girls basketball team up there, and he's living in Ames, so I'll be able to go there, stay the night in Ames for that one this coming Wednesday. So I'm pretty excited for that. I've never been to Hilton Coliseum, and I know they go pretty crazy there. I always like, I'm spoiled being a Kansas grad, being a Kansas guy, and going to Allen Fieldhouse for most of my college basketball games. So it's cool to see the other environments, see how they stack up to Allen Fieldhouse.
Yeah, you got to find the good spots to eat. I heard Fanta yesterday talking about all his spots he goes on the road to eat. So you got to ask around for that.
I actually have Fanta coming on the podcast on Monday, before the Iowa State game. So I'll ask him what's going on there.
You know where he started his writing career? Zags Blog. He's one of many illustrious Zags Blogs alums. So you'll have to ask him about that.
Will do. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us, chatting a little college hoops and college recruiting with us. I'm Sam Lance, joined by Adam Zagoria. Thank you, guys. See you next time on ZAGSPOD.